Why did the storm feel different that night? It wasn't the thunder or the wind. It was the silence that came before it that heavy, expectant, quiet soldiers learned to fear more than the noise of battle. Inside the helicopter, Sergeant Amanda Hawk Reynolds sat perfectly still, eyes fixed on the rain hammering against the metal skin of the aircraft. The rotor blades above screamed through the dark, slicing clouds that swallowed the peaks below. Her hands tightened around the straps of her harness, knuckles pale. Years of training had taught her how to control her breathing, how to quiet the noise inside. But something in her gut twisted. She'd flown into combat zones before: Iraq, Somalia, northern Afghanistan, but this mission had a different kind of weight. The kind that doesn't come from danger but from something unseen, something wrong. The younger ranger beside her was murmuring into the comms, his voice cracking through the static. "Enemy fire reported near the ridge," he said, barely audible over the howl of wind. Amanda didn't move. Fear was a luxury she'd learned to live without. Rangers didn't get scared, they got sharper. They focused harder. And right now, every part of her focus was screaming one thing: stay ready. Through the windshield, flashes of lightning illuminated the jagged silhouette of the Afghan border, a mountain range so high it seemed to stab the sky. Somewhere in that chaos of rock and storm was their target, a small village on the edge of nowhere. They were to extract a high-value informant, quick in, quick out. That was the plan. Plans never survive first contact. The first hit came out of nowhere, a violent jolt that ripped through the aircraft. The pilot cursed under his breath, fighting the controls. Tracer rounds tore through the rain like streaks of fire, ricocheting off the fuselage. The helicopter groaned, the smell of burning oil and metal filling the cabin. Amanda's instincts kicked in before thought. Secure. Assess. Breathe. The chopper tilted hard left. One of the younger soldiers screamed. The side door banged open, a twisted sheet of metal flapping against the wind. Rain poured in, turning the inside into a maelstrom of sound and chaos. Then came the flash. An explosion ripped through the tail rotor, blinding white light and searing heat. The helicopter spun violently, losing altitude fast. Amanda felt the world twist. Her harness yanked tight, biting into her shoulders. She reached for the nearest support too late. The frame tore apart, metal screaming against gravity. And then she was falling. Time didn't slow the way they say it does. It shattered. The roar of the storm, the spray of rain, the glow of fire above, all of it blurred into fragments of noise and light. Her body twisted in freefall, her training screaming commands inside her head. Tuck, protect the head, keep the core tight. Below, the world was nothing but darkness and rock. She hit once, then again. The first impact stole her breath. The second felt like fire exploding through her ribs. She rolled, bounced, slid, stone tearing at her uniform, blood mixing with the rain. When she finally stopped, the world was silent except for the wind. Pain, cold breathing, alive. Amanda lay in a narrow ravine, her chest heaving. Every nerve screamed, but her mind was already cataloging damage. Arm functional, leg bleeding but responsive, head ringing but conscious. She had survived a fall that should have killed her. Somewhere above, the helicopter's dying engine wailed as it disappeared into the clouds. She listened, straining to catch a voice, a signal, anything. There was only static. "Command, this is Reynolds. Do you copy?" Nothing, just the rain. She tried again. "This is Hawk. Anyone read?" Still silence. Her radio was dead, fried in the blast. Her ribs throbbed with every breath. She rolled onto her side, forcing herself upright. Every motion was agony, but she didn't hesitate. The storm wasn't mercy. It was cover. They'd think she was dead. And maybe, for a moment, she almost wished she was. It would have been easier than the climb that waited ahead. But Amanda Reynolds wasn't built for easy. She was a ranger, trained to adapt, survive, and move forward when everything else burned to ash. She pressed her palm against the cold stone, steadying herself. Blood streaked her glove, dripping onto the mud. "Not yet," she whispered to no one. "Not today." The ravine was narrow, steep, and slick with rain. Every foothold had to be earned. Her ribs ached with every movement, but she pushed on low, silent, deliberate. Training took over where pain tried to win. Move, hide, observe, survive. Halfway up, she froze. Footprints, fresh ones, deep in the mud just ahead. She crouched, tracing the edges with her fingers. The heel pattern wasn't American. Insurgent. 3, maybe 4 men. Recent. They were searching. Her breathing slowed. Instinct told her to disappear. She backed against the rocks, blending into the shadows, the storm masking her movements. The sound of distant voices drifted through the rain, speaking Pashto, hurried and nervous. Flashlights cut across the darkness, beams slicing through mist. Amanda waited, perfectly still, a predator in pain. When the voices faded, she moved again, slipping deeper into the ravine until she found a shallow cave. It wasn't much, a wedge of stone barely large enough to crawl into, but it was dry. And right now, dry was everything. She crawled inside, body shaking from exhaustion. The cold bit through her uniform, through the blood and mud. Every bone felt like fire. She forced her trembling hands to work, pulling out what little remained of her gear, a knife, a flare she couldn't use, and half a ration bar crushed in her vest pocket. She ate half, saved the rest, then tore a strip from her sleeve to bandage the cut across her arm. Every movement was deliberate, mechanical. It wasn't just survival, it was defiance. Outside, the storm raged. Thunder rolled over the mountains like the sky itself was angry. Amanda closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the ache settle in her chest. In the silence, she heard voices, echoes of the past. Her instructor at ranger school, gravel-voiced and relentless. Rangers don't quit. They adapt. They survive. She remembered the nights in the mud, the endless drills, the exhaustion that blurred pain into rhythm. She had been broken before, but never beaten. She whispered the words softly into the storm, more prayer than promise. "I will never quit. I will never leave a fallen comrade." The mantra steadied her. When the wind finally eased, she pushed herself upright again, scanning the horizon through the cave's narrow mouth. The valley stretched below, jagged, brutal, endless. Somewhere out there, her team was still fighting, still believing she was gone. But she was. She'd been thrown from the sky, yes, but she was still breathing, still fighting, and as long as her heart was beating, she wasn't done. She checked her sidearm, a few rounds left, dented but functional. She tested the trigger, smooth enough. Then she looked up at the cliffs above, rainwater dripping down in silver lines. The climb would hurt, it might even kill her. But standing still meant dying slower. She took one breath, let it out, and began to climb. The rocks tore at her palms, her shoulders screamed, her ribs felt like knives in her chest. But she didn't stop. Not once. She gritted her teeth, pulling herself upward inch by inch until her arms shook uncontrollably. When she finally reached the top, dawn was breaking, faint light spilling over the peaks, painting the valley in shades of cold gold. Smoke rose in the distance where the helicopter had gone down. Amanda stared at it, jaw tightening. Somewhere in that wreck the mission had died, but missions could be resurrected, and so could soldiers. She tore off what was left of her damaged harness and dropped it into the ravine below. It vanished into shadow. The wind caught her hair as she whispered into the silence, her voice calm, steady, and cold. "You threw me out of the sky." A pause. "But you forgot who I am." She straightened, pain burning through every inch of her body, and began walking toward the smoke. Behind her, the mountains echoed with thunder, the last breath of the storm that had tried to kill her. Ahead, the valley waited, brutal and alive. Somewhere out there were her brothers in arms, fighting, surviving, believing she was gone. She would find them. Because rangers don't fall, they rise. And when she rose, the mountains would remember her name. Amanda Hawk Reynolds, the woman the sky refused to kill. Why did she even join? That was the question everyone asked when Amanda Reynolds first walked into Ranger School. A slim, quiet woman carrying nothing but a duffel bag and a stare that could cut through armor. They didn't see a soldier, they saw a statement, a woman in a place built to break men. The air at Fort Benning was thick with humidity and arrogance. Rows of recruits stood in mud and sweat, shouting cadence through gritted teeth. The instructors moved among them like hawks, sharp, merciless, and looking for weakness. Amanda stood silent, her eyes forward, hands steady on the straps of her pack. She didn't blink when the drill sergeant stopped in front of her, eyes narrowing. "You think you can handle this?" he said. She didn't answer immediately. She measured her breath. "Yes, Sergeant." His jaw tightened. "We'll see." They saw her as a test. She saw it as a promise. Every morning started before dawn. Cold rain, mud, wind that bit through her uniform like knives. She learned quickly that Ranger School wasn't about strength. It was about will. The will to push when the body breaks, to stay silent when insulted, and to keep moving when everyone else collapses. While others cursed the weather, Amanda listened to it. The rhythm of rain on her helmet became a metronome for focus. The mud became resistance training. The pain, a teacher. But not everyone saw it that way. Whispers followed her everywhere. "She won't make it, too slow, too soft. A woman can't keep up." She didn't answer any of them. She didn't need to. One afternoon during a 20-mile ruck march, one of the bigger recruits shoved her shoulder, laughing as she stumbled in the mud. "Move it, Reynolds. You're slowing us down." She didn't respond. She steadied her pack and kept walking. The others laughed, but by mile 19, when that same recruit collapsed from exhaustion, Amanda was the one who hauled his gear and carried him across the finish line. She didn't say a word when she set him down, breathing hard, mud dripping from her chin. Respect doesn't come from speeches. It comes from the silence between them. Ranger School was designed to break people. Sleep deprivation, hunger, endless drills. It stripped soldiers of their comfort until only instinct remained. For Amanda, instinct meant precision. She didn't waste words or movements. She memorized maps until she could navigate blindfolded. She studied weather patterns to predict terrain conditions before the instructors did. When others stumbled through swamps in frustration, she moved quietly, knowing exactly where the ground would hold. Discipline wasn't something she learned, it was something she refined. Her call sign came the night everything nearly fell apart. It was a live fire night exercise, designed to simulate ambush conditions. A cold fog rolled in, turning the range into a maze of shadows. Recruits were supposed to move under cover, coordinate by radio, and engage simulated targets without alerting enemy sentries. Halfway through, the radios failed. Chaos erupted, voices shouted, gunfire cracked in every direction. Amanda stayed low, calm, listening. She watched the tree line through the mist, the faint glow of a sniper's scope flickering 2 clicks away. Most recruits didn't even notice. She did. She adjusted her rifle, calculated wind drift, elevation and distance, all in the space of a breath, and fired once. The shot was perfect. The instructors stopped the exercise immediately. Later, one of them pulled her aside. "How the hell did you see that sniper?" Amanda looked at him, rain dripping from her helmet. "I didn't see him," she said quietly. "I watched everything else move except that one spot." That night, they started calling her Hawk. The name stuck. But being the best shot didn't protect her from sabotage. One morning, her pack was switched before inspection. The water bladder was empty. Her boots replaced with a pair 2 sizes too small. She didn't say a word. She took the pain, adjusted the laces, and completed the 12-mile movement anyway. When she returned, blistered and bleeding, the instructor looked at her feet and frowned. "Who did that to you?" Amanda's voice was flat. "Doesn't matter, Sergeant," I finished. He didn't press. Some lessons teach themselves. She wasn't competing against anyone. She was building something inside herself, something that couldn't be taken away. Humility, precision, leadership. She learned how to command not through shouting but through calm. When a team member panicked during a river crossing, nearly swept away by the current, Amanda was the one who grabbed his arm, grounded him, and guided him back to safety. No yelling, no panic, just quiet direction. Afterward, the man who had once doubted her followed every order she gave without question. Respect earned through crisis lasts longer than rank. The days blurred into exhaustion. The instructors tested every limit. Nights were spent lying in freezing mud, listening to wind rattle through trees. Hunger clawed at her stomach. Sleep came in stolen minutes. But in that suffering, something inside her crystallized. The realization that the body breaks long before the mind does, and that endurance isn't about strength, it's about purpose. Her purpose was simple: never quit, never fail those beside her. During one of the final training exercises, a simulated ambush, Amanda's squad was tasked with navigating dense forest terrain at night, without radio contact. The weather turned brutal: cold rain, howling wind, and zero visibility. Halfway through, her compass cracked. The others began to panic. Amanda knelt in the mud, took a slow breath, and listened. Wind direction, distant water flow, subtle terrain slope. She oriented them using sound and instinct alone, guiding her team through the forest and arriving at the extraction point 2 hours early. When they stumbled into the clearing, soaked and shivering, the instructor just stared. "You don't quit, Reynolds," he said. "You recalculate." That line stuck with her forever. By the end of Ranger School, she wasn't just surviving, she was leading. When other recruits fell behind, she carried their packs. When someone lost their rations, she shared hers. Not because she wanted approval, because she understood what the creed meant. Never leave a fallen comrade. One night during a mountain survival test, she huddled in a cave with 3 other recruits. Temperatures had dropped below freezing. One of the men began shaking uncontrollably, muttering that he couldn't make it till dawn. Amanda leaned closer, her voice steady. "You can. The body wants to quit long before the mission ends, but the mission doesn't care. We move when it hurts. That's what makes us Rangers." He nodded weakly. The next morning, he was the first to stand. By graduation, she had earned not only the Ranger tab but the respect of those who once doubted her. Even the instructors, hardened by years of breaking men, saw something in her that wasn't typical. It wasn't her speed or her aim, it was her silence. Amanda didn't boast. She didn't brag. She just stood there during the final ceremony, her uniform torn, her boots still muddy, her face expressionless. The commanding officer pinned her insignia to her chest and said only one word: "Unbreakable." She never forgot that. Months later, when she found herself standing on the tarmac, boarding the helicopter that would carry her into the storm over Thunder Ridge, she could still hear her instructor's voice echoing in her mind. "Rangers don't quit, they adapt, they survive." That line was more than a motto, it was prophecy. The same grit that had carried her through mud, cold, and hunger would now be tested against the sky itself. But back then, she didn't know that the real test wouldn't come in training grounds or firing ranges. It would come when gravity tore her from the helicopter, when fire met storm, and when the world believed she was gone. The woman who would one day crawl from the wreckage of the Afghan mountains wasn't born in that valley. She was built here, in mud, in exhaustion, in humiliation, and in silence. And every lesson carved into her bones at Ranger School whispered the same truth she would one day live to prove. Rangers don't fall, they rise. How do you know when you've truly been abandoned? Is it the silence on the radio, the lack of footsteps returning for you, Or is it when you realize the world has already written your name on a list of the dead? Amanda Hawk Reynolds didn't have time to ask those questions. She was too busy surviving. The dawn after the fall was brittle and pale. The storm had finally broken, leaving behind shredded clouds drifting low over the peaks. Mist clung to the jagged cliffs like smoke rising from a graveyard. Amanda lay in a narrow crease of stone, half buried in mud. Her entire body throbbed with pain, ribs fractured, arms swollen, blood dried black against her uniform. The air was thin, metallic with the scent of rain and ash. She tried to move. Her body protested with a sharp, blinding pulse of pain. She bit back a sound, forcing herself to breathe through it. One breath at a time. That's how she'd been trained to break every impossible thing into smaller, survivable moments. Her head spun as she scanned the horizon. The wreckage of the helicopter burned faintly in the distance, a column of gray smoke twisting into the pale sky. That was where command would focus recovery efforts, but not for her. To them, she was gone. Her last position on record had been midair. And yet here she was, broken, bruised, breathing. Amanda pressed a hand to her ribs. Each inhale felt like a knife. She couldn't stay still. The cold would kill her faster than the wounds. She had to move. She braced against a rock, pushed herself up, and nearly blacked out from the pain. Her breath came ragged. The world tilted, then steadied. She took a slow step, then another. The valley below stretched for miles, jagged stone, steep ridges, no visible paths. A place the locals called the Valley of Bones. It earned the name from the number of soldiers who had tried and failed to cross it. She didn't plan to fail. Amanda scanned the terrain the way she'd been taught, angles, shadows, potential water lines. Her mind was running calculations while her body screamed to stop. Survival wasn't instinct. It was math. Every decision had a price. She checked her gear minimal. A sidearm with 5 rounds left, one half-melted flare, her knife, a torn sling made from what was left of her parachute harness. She'd lost her radio, her pack, her rations. She exhaled through clenched teeth. "Okay," she whispered, "then we make do." She scavenged what she could. A strip of fabric became a bandage. A broken piece of metal from the chopper became a mirror for signaling, if she ever found someone friendly enough to signal. The first step forward hurt. The second one bled. The third, that one started to feel like control. The valley was quiet except for the wind. It whistled through the canyons like a warning. Amanda kept low, hugging the rock walls as she descended. Every few steps she stopped to listen. The mountains had a rhythm, distant thunder, shifting gravel, echoing gunfire far away. The enemy was still out there. And if they'd planned this ambush, if the harness failure wasn't an accident, then someone had wanted her gone. Her jaw tightened. That thought lit something cold inside her. She didn't know who, she didn't know why, but she would find out. For now, survival came first. By mid-morning, the clouds had cleared enough for sunlight to break through harsh, white light that burned off the mist. She could see the valley floor below, a tangle of rock and sparse brush. No smoke, no movement, just endless stone. Her thirst hit before noon. The canteen she'd salvaged from the wreck was half full, rainwater, metallic but clean enough. She rationed it, 2 sips at a time, holding each one in her mouth before swallowing. Her stomach growled. Hunger would come soon. She ignored it. Focus, one task at a time. She moved along a ridgeline, searching for shelter. The temperature swung wildly, cold shadows, scorching sun. The rocks radiated heat like an oven. She stripped her outer layer, tying it around her waist to reduce sweat loss. Her training whispered in the back of her mind. Dehydration kills faster than hunger. Then movement. Down below, 3 figures, armed, moving through the ravine. She froze, pressing herself flat against the rocks. Binoculars would have helped, but her eyes were enough. They weren't her team. Wrong posture, wrong movement rhythm. Insurgents searching. She counted their steps, slow, deliberate sweep pattern. They were hunting. Amanda stayed perfectly still until they passed, their voices echoing faintly off the canyon walls. When the sound faded, she exhaled slowly, feeling her pulse pounding in her ears. She could feel it now, the shift, the moment when survival becomes instinct, when fear transforms into calculation. She was outnumbered, wounded, alone, but she had one advantage: no one knew she was alive. That made her dangerous. By late afternoon, clouds began to roll in again, heavy and gray. Thunder rumbled in the distance, another storm building. She had to find cover before it hit. She moved quickly, ignoring the pain, climbing higher until she found a shallow overhang carved into the rock. It wasn't deep, but it would break the wind. As the first drops fell, she collapsed inside, breath coming hard and fast. The storm roared back to life, rain pounding against stone like artillery. Amanda tore a piece of the torn parachute to wrap her wounded arm. She bit down on a strip of cloth and pulled tight, the pain making her vision flash white. When she was done, she leaned back against the rock wall, staring at the flickering lightning outside. Each flash illuminated the valley below, sharp, blinding glimpses of her isolation. The first tear came before she could stop it. Not from fear, from fury. Fury at the idea that someone had planned this, that someone had looked at her and thought she wouldn't survive. Her breath steadied, the tears stopped. Pain turned into resolve. "This isn't how I go," she whispered to the storm. Hours passed. The wind screamed. The temperature dropped until her teeth chattered uncontrollably. She forced herself to stay awake. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. Instead, she listened. The storm masked everything, but underneath it she could hear the faint rhythm of her heart, steady, defiant, alive. She remembered her instructor's voice: "Adapt, survive, rise." She smiled faintly, blood on her teeth. "Yes, Sergeant, I remember." When the storm finally broke near dawn, she stepped out, shivering but alive. The valley glistened under the pale morning sun. The air smelled of rain and ash. Amanda crouched and examined the ground near her shelter. Footprints again, fresh, small, light. Civilians maybe, or scouts. She followed them cautiously. After half an hour, she found a small campfire site long cold, but there were remnants of food. Rice, dried fruit. Someone had been here recently. Locals maybe, or friendlies hiding from both sides. She scavenged what she could, eating in silence, the taste dull but life-saving. Then she noticed something, a torn scrap of fabric stuck in a thorn bush nearby. Military pattern, U.S. issue. Her pulse quickened. Her team. She scanned the area, tracks leading north, deeper into the mountains. Her chest tightened. She recognized the spacing, the formation of the boot prints. Rangers. They were alive. She traced the prints with her fingers. The mud was still damp, less than a day old. They were close. Amanda exhaled slowly, her pulse hammering in her throat. Her team believed she was gone, but if she could reach them, if she could just get close enough, she could warn them. Because if she'd been pushed, if her harness had been tampered with, then someone among them was compromised. She couldn't let them walk blind into that. The sun climbed higher. She packed what little she had, adjusted her sling, and started moving again. Every step was agony, but pain was irrelevant now. It was background noise. As she moved, the valley changed. The cliffs grew steeper, the shadows deeper. The air grew thinner, colder. She found a small stream cutting through the rocks. She crouched, filtering the water through torn fabric, drinking slowly. It was then she saw movement in the reflection. A shadow behind her. She turned sharply, weapon raised. Nothing. Only the whisper of wind. Her muscles stayed tight for a long time before she lowered the weapon again. But the feeling didn't leave, the sense of being watched. Maybe it was paranoia, or maybe someone really was tracking her. Either way, she couldn't stop. She pressed onward until the sun began to fall again, painting the valley in gold and crimson. From a ridge, she could see smoke in the distance, faint, thin, rising from what looked like a controlled fire. A village, maybe the extraction site. Or a trap. She didn't care. Amanda crouched, scanning the landscape, her mind already building tactical routes, fallback points, ambush angles. She would move at dusk. When the last light faded, she whispered one more line to the darkness, part prayer, part defiance. You threw me out of the sky, but you forgot what lands after the fall. Then she slipped into the shadows and began her descent, a lone soldier against the valley that wanted her buried. The mountains didn't know it yet, but the ghost they had tried to kill was coming back to life. What does it take to disappear? Not from sight, but from memory, from every map, every whisper, every prayer. Amanda Hawk Reynolds was about to find out. The Valley of Bones was cruel. The locals said even the wind carried ghosts here, the voices of soldiers who had walked in and never walked out. It was the kind of place that stripped you down until only instinct remained. By the fourth day after the fall, Amanda wasn't the same woman who had boarded the helicopter. Pain had sharpened her. Silence had become her weapon. She no longer moved like a soldier. She moved like the mountain itself. The dawn light crawled across jagged cliffs, cold and metallic. Amanda crouched behind a cluster of rocks, scanning the horizon through the reflection of a broken lens she'd scavenged from wreckage. The glass was cracked, but it worked just enough to spot movement. Down below, enemy patrols snaked through the valley floor, rifles slung low, their shadows stretching long in the rising light. They were looking for something. No, someone. Amanda kept her breathing slow, measured. The ache in her ribs pulsed with each heartbeat, but pain was a rhythm she could control. She was learning how to use it as a reminder that she was still alive. She studied the patrols, how they moved when they paused, the way their eyes tracked the ridges. She could see it in their posture. They weren't confident. They were afraid. Something had happened here after the crash, something the insurgents didn't understand. And now, in their minds, something unseen was moving among them. Amanda shifted her weight slightly, testing the ground beneath her. The slope was loose. One wrong move and the rocks would give her away. She waited, counted to 30, moved again. Silence was survival. Every small sound had meaning: the crunch of gravel, the hiss of wind through a crack, the click of metal on stone. To an untrained ear, it was background noise. To her, it was language. Hours passed that way, crawling, observing, waiting. She learned long ago that survival wasn't about endurance. It was about patience. The mountain would kill those who rushed. At midday, the sun was brutal. Heat shimmered off the rocks, turning the air into liquid glass. She used that to her advantage, crossing open ground when the light distorted visibility. Each step was precise, slow enough to be invisible, fast enough to avoid collapse. She found a small stream trickling from between two boulders and crouched beside it. The water was cold, cloudy with sediment. She cupped it in her hands, sipping slowly. Then she froze. A sound behind her. A boot scraping stone. Her sidearm was in her hand before thought. She pivoted, crouched, eyes scanning. Silence. The wind howled through the gorge. Nothing moved. She waited, muscles coiled, until the echo of her heartbeat was the only sound left. Then carefully, she lowered her weapon. She was being tracked. Not by the enemy. They were too loud, too obvious. This was someone trained. Her mind flickered back to the helicopter, the loosened harness, the subtle tampering. Someone had made sure she would fall. Someone who didn't expect her to live long enough to matter. But she was alive, and if that someone was still out there, they would have to live knowing that. She collected her gear, drank one last mouthful of water, and kept moving. The terrain grew harsher, the air colder. The valley narrowed into a gorge lined with cliffs so tall they swallowed the sky. Shadows moved like living things. Amanda followed them, her mind mapping every route, every angle, every sound. By nightfall, she found an alcove to rest. She built no fire, light was death. Instead, she wrapped herself in her torn jacket, biting down on a strip of cloth to dull the ache in her ribs. She needed food. She spent the next morning setting simple traps using wire scavenged from her parachute rig, small loops set along animal trails. It was a gamble, but better than starving. While waiting, she explored higher ground, scanning the landscape. That's when she saw its smoke, faint but deliberate, rising from the opposite ridge. Not a random fire, controlled, tactical. Someone was signaling. Her first thought was her team. Her second was a trap. Either way, she had to know. She descended slowly, using shadow as cover, the same way she'd been taught to move behind enemy lines. Every movement had purpose. Even her breathing matched the wind to mask noise. Halfway down the slope, she paused. Footprints again, heavy military issue, not insurgent, American. Her chest tightened. She followed them carefully until she reached a clearing surrounded by jagged rock. The remains of a camp, 3 ration wrappers, a broken radio, a blood-stained bandage. She crouched, studying it. The blood was fresh. Her hand trembled as she turned over one of the wrappers, standard issue MRE. Her team's. They were alive. But if the blood meant what she thought it did, they weren't safe. She checked the radio, cracked, half-dead but functional enough to catch static. She turned the dial slowly, listening for anything. Nothing but static, then a faint voice. Extraction delayed, enemy activity, Thunder Ridge. She froze, the voice was distant, distorted but real. Her pulse raced. Thunder Ridge, their designated fallback zone. It was nearly 10 miles east, across terrain that would break a lesser soldier in half. She looked east. The ridges there were sharp, unforgiving, and crawling with enemy patrols. She smiled faintly. 10 miles, she whispered, easy day. The next hours became a blur of movement and pain. She climbed, crawled, dragged herself through mud and stone. Each step tore open new cuts, reopened old wounds, but she didn't stop. Every time her body screamed to rest, she remembered the faces of her team, the rookie who couldn't stop smiling, the medic who sang under her breath during missions, the commander who trusted her aim more than his own. They were her family, her responsibility, and she would not let them die thinking she was gone. By late afternoon, clouds began to roll back in. The wind picked up cold, sharp, carrying the smell of smoke. She was getting close. As the sun dipped below the peaks, she spotted movement not far away. 6 figures moving in formation along a ridge. Not her team. Insurgents. They were carrying something. A flag. And beneath it a soldier, bound. Amanda's heart stopped. The uniform was American. Her pulse quickened. Her hand found her weapon. She couldn't engage, not yet. She was outnumbered, low on ammo and half-broken, but she could follow. She tracked them silently from the shadows, nodding their route, east, toward a cluster of caves near Thunder Ridge. She recognized the terrain from recon maps. That was where her team was heading. It wasn't just a battlefield anymore. It was a trap. As night fell, Amanda crept closer, staying low. The insurgents stopped briefly to rest. She crouched behind a ridge 20 yards away. She could hear them talking, laughing, careless. She caught fragments of words in Pashto, something about the woman from the sky. Her blood ran cold. They were talking about her. To them, she was already a myth, a ghost that had fallen from the storm. She smiled to herself, the expression small, sharp, dangerous. Good, she whispered, let's make it true. When the insurgents moved again, she waited until they were out of sight, then doubled back fast, silent, efficient. She needed elevation, observation, timing. Her team would be heading straight into the ambush at dawn. She had one night to stop it. The valley had taken her weapons, her comfort, and nearly her life, but it had given her something else: invisibility. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was adapting. And when dawn came, she would rise, not as the soldier who fell, but as the hunter who learned to walk between shadows. That night, under a sky full of unfamiliar stars, Amanda Hawk Reynolds pressed her hand into the cold ground and made herself a promise. They threw her from the helicopter, but she would be the one to end this. Not with revenge, with precision, with silence, with the discipline only a ranger understands. Because ghosts don't die. They return. And by sunrise, the Valley of Bones would remember hers. When does survival become something else? When does it stop being about breathing and start being about purpose? Amanda Hawk Reynolds didn't know the exact moment that shift happened, but somewhere between the fourth and fifth night in the Valley of Bones, she stopped running from death and began walking toward it. The valley had shaped her into something else, leaner, quieter, sharper. Every sound meant something. Every shadow carried weight. She had become what her instructors at Ranger School had warned about, the kind of soldier who stops fighting for orders and starts fighting for meaning. The dawn came slow, bleeding pale light through the mountains. Amanda lay flat on a ridge overlooking an enemy encampment. Below, a dozen insurgents moved through the remains of an old stone village, their breath visible in the cold morning air. They were methodical, organized. This wasn't a random patrol. It was a forward operating position, a staging ground for the ambush she'd overheard the night before. Her team would walk straight into it. Amanda studied the terrain, her mind already building a mental map. 3 entry points. 2 snipers posted on elevated ground, a single communications array powered by a small generator near the center. She had no heavy weapons, no backup, just her sidearm, a knife, and the mind of a ranger. That would have to be enough. Her body ached with every movement, but fatigue had become a companion she no longer noticed. Pain was just another signal to move slower, to breathe steadier, to think sharper. She watched the insurgents for nearly 2 hours, memorizing their routines. Every time one guard shifted position, she logged it. Every time someone lit a cigarette, she noted the angle of the light. She could feel the rhythm of their movements. And when you understand the rhythm of something, you can break it. The first strike came at dusk. Amanda waited until the wind picked up the perfect cover. She moved down from the ridge, low and silent, her steps sinking to the gusts, each movement rehearsed in her head before it happened. At the edge of the camp, 2 guards stood near a rusted truck. Their rifles hung loose, their conversation lazy. They didn't expect ghosts. Amanda crouched behind a wall of crumbling stone. She waited for the wind again, that deep, hollow moan through the canyon. Then she moved. One swift strike, her knife across the first guard's throat. The second turned too late, a muffled shot. His body dropped soundlessly. Amanda dragged them into the shadows, her breath slow, controlled. She stripped their radios and ammunition, then slipped further into the camp. No alarms, no shouts, just the soft hum of the generator. She crouched beside it, inspecting the wiring. One cut could blind the entire outpost. She smiled faintly. Adapt, survive, rise. She made the cut. Darkness swallowed the camp. Panic followed. Voices shouted, flashlights flickered wildly, footsteps scrambled through the dirt. Amanda moved through them like smoke. She wasn't fighting them head-on. She was dismantling their order. A shot cracked through the dark, one of them firing blindly. The muzzle flash revealed his position. She fired once in response. Silence followed. Then she was gone again. By the time the enemy restored power, 4 of their men were down and their communications dead. Amanda was already back in the hills, watching from above. The insurgents were terrified. They shouted her nickname, Hawk, as if saying it might summon her or make her vanish. She didn't need to hear the translation to know what they were saying. The woman from the sky, the ghost who wouldn't die. She smiled bitterly. Legends were useful. They made people afraid of the dark, and she was the dark. But legends don't rest, and Amanda couldn't afford to. Her mission wasn't over. Her team was still trapped somewhere east, pinned in the canyons beyond Thunder Ridge. She packed what she could from the outpost, water, ammunition, rations, then began the climb again. The terrain grew harsher with each step, the rocks cutting into her boots, the air thinner, sharper. Every few hours she stopped to listen. Distant gunfire, echoing off the stone. They were close. She picked up her pace, moving through gullies and across ridges until she reached a high plateau overlooking the lower valley. From here she could see them. Her team. Tiny figures huddled behind makeshift barricades, smoke rising from spent rounds. They were under fire heavily. Amanda's heart clenched. There were fewer of them than before. She raised her scavenged binoculars, focusing on their position. Sergeant Jenkins, Private Morales, the medic Ellis, all alive, barely. But they were cornered. Enemy forces had surrounded them from 3 sides, pushing them toward a dead-end gorge. Amanda's pulse quickened. She didn't have time for strategy. She needed a distraction, something to pull fire away long enough for them to regroup. Her eyes swept the terrain. There, an abandoned supply truck half a mile south, rigged with fuel barrels. Perfect. She moved fast, ignoring the pain in her legs. When she reached it, she checked the ignition. Dead. No power. But she didn't need it to move. She jammed a rock under the accelerator, set a flare beneath the fuel tank, and used a strip of torn fabric to delay ignition. A crude, improvised time fuse. Then she pushed. The truck rolled downhill, gathering speed, bouncing over rocks, the flare burning shorter by the second. Amanda turned and ran, uphill this time, lungs burning, ribs screaming. Behind her, the explosion ripped through the canyon, a thunderclap of fire and shrapnel. The mountains answered with echoes. Enemy gunfire ceased instantly, shouts erupted, confusion spread. Amanda didn't stop to watch. She moved higher, using the smoke as cover, until she was directly above her team's position. Through the haze, she saw them shifting, regrouping, returning fire. Then faintly, she heard it. "Command, this is Jenkins, we have movement. South Ridge, possible friendly." Amanda smiled faintly. Not yet. She wasn't ready to reveal herself. Not until she had secured their escape route. She scanned the opposite ridge, where the enemy's secondary position sat. 2 machine gun nests, exposed but guarded. Her rifle was damaged, but one thing Ranger School had taught her was that precision wasn't in the weapon, it was in the will. She took a breath, steadied her grip, and fired. The first shot hit metal, sparking, the second silence. The enemy ducked, confusion spread, Amanda used it. She moved down the slope fast, switching position constantly to make it sound like multiple shooters. Her team seized the opportunity, advancing from cover. A symphony of chaos, smoke, fire, shouting, gunfire bouncing off stone. And in the middle of it, Amanda, unseen, unheard, unstoppable. When the gunfire finally died, the canyon fell eerily quiet. Smoke drifted lazily in the cold wind. Amanda crouched behind a rock, scanning. Her team was alive, fewer than before, but alive. She wanted to call out to tell them she was there, but she didn't, not yet. There was still movement in the shadows. The insurgents were retreating but not running. They were regrouping deeper in the valley. And Amanda understood something terrifying. This wasn't about them anymore. This was about her. The ambush, the sabotage, the whispers of a leak. Someone had marked her for death before this mission ever began. And if her team survived tonight, that person would know she was still alive. That meant one thing: they would come again. Amanda leaned against the cold rock, catching her breath. The sun was setting, bleeding gold across the peaks. She closed her eyes for a moment, exhaustion washing over her. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by the dull throb of pain. For a heartbeat, she wanted to stop, just stop. But then she heard it, the faint, familiar words echoing from a memory. Her instructor's voice. "You don't stop when you're tired. You stop when the mission done." She opened her eyes. Her mission wasn't done, not even close. She moved again, slower now, her silhouette blending with the darkening rocks. In the valley below, the fire from the explosion still burned. Her team would regroup there, call for extraction. They didn't know it yet, but she was already clearing their path. One ridge over, a new group of enemy reinforcements moved into position. Amanda tracked them silently, planning her next strike. Her body screamed for rest, her mind refused. Because this wasn't about survival anymore. It was about redemption. For her team, for the mission, for the name they would remember long after she was gone. Amanda Hawk Reynolds, the ranger who fell from the sky and walked out of the valley as a ghost. She looked at the stars through the smoke, whispering softly to herself, half prayer, half oath. "They threw me from the helicopter." She chambered the next round. "They thought I'd die." A long pause, a steady breath. "Now they'll learn what a ranger becomes when death doesn't work." And with that she vanished once more, into shadow, into silence, into legend. When people talk about ghosts, they imagine something cold and hollow, a whisper in the dark. But a real ghost is purpose that refuses to die. By the 6th day in the Valley of Bones, Amanda Hawk Reynolds had become exactly that. Her team didn't know she was alive. The enemy thought she was a curse. And the mountains, they just watched in silence as she moved through them like wind. She had learned to hunt like the valley did, quiet, patient, merciless. Below her, dawn crept in, pale and uncertain. The sky was bruised purple, the peaks painted gold where sunlight dared to touch. In the ravine below, her team's campfire burned low, 3 men left, wounded, exhausted, waiting for extraction that wasn't coming. Amanda lay on her stomach at the ridge's edge, binoculars pressed to her eyes. Her breath came in slow, measured intervals. She could see them clearly now. Sergeant Jenkins, Private Morales, and Doc Ellis, the medic. 3 out of 9. The rest were gone, buried in the silence of the valley. Amanda's throat tightened. She'd been with those men for years, laughed with them, shared rations, rain, and silence. They had been her brothers in arms, and she had failed to keep them safe. She exhaled softly. "Not again," she whispered to herself. Her focus shifted to movement along the western ridge. Through her cracked lens, she spotted 2 groups of insurgents fanning out, slow, methodical, disciplined. This wasn't a random search. They knew where the Americans were. And that meant only one thing: someone was feeding them intel. Amanda's grip tightened around the rifle she'd scavenged. It wasn't regulation issue, heavier, older but functional. She'd reassembled it the night before using parts from 3 broken weapons. Crude, but precise enough for what she needed. She lined up the scope and watched the patrol advance. Her mind ran the calculations automatically: wind, elevation, drift, distance. All of it drilled into her long ago. Then she saw him. A figure moving differently from the rest. Cleaner gear, U.S. sidearm on his hip, his face half covered with a scarf, but she knew that posture. Lieutenant Cole Maddox. Her pulse went still. He wasn't supposed to be here. He'd been the one briefing the mission back at the base. The one who'd stood beside the helicopter that morning, smiling. The one who'd adjusted her harness. A flash of memory hit her, the loose buckle, the fall. the sudden snap of metal giving way. It hadn't been an accident. Cole had been there, he'd seen to it himself. And now he was walking with the enemy. Amanda felt something deep inside her fracture, not from pain but disbelief. Cole, the officer who'd once told her she was the best marksman he'd ever met, the one who'd covered for her when command doubted her record. The betrayal was clean, surgical, personal. She blinked hard, forcing the sting from her eyes. Emotions were weight. Weight slowed you down. She steadied her aim. She could take him now, one shot, and the man who tried to kill her would be gone. Her finger rested on the trigger. But something inside her hesitated. Killing him wouldn't solve it. Not yet. She needed answers. She needed proof, not vengeance. She lowered the rifle slowly, breath trembling. He wasn't her mission, not now. Her team was. Amanda tracked the insurgents' path as they moved closer to Jenkins and the others. She could already see how it would unfold. They'd flank from the ridge, suppress from above, and push the survivors into open ground. Unless she changed the rhythm. She moved fast, circling the ridge until she was parallel to the advancing force. Each movement calculated, each pause perfectly timed. The valley was alive with sound, wind, grit, echo, and she used every one of them as cover. When she reached position, she waited. The first group came into range. 3 men too close together. She fired once. The lead man dropped. The others dove for cover. Amanda shifted positions instantly, firing again from a new angle. 2 shots, 2 bodies. The others scattered, shouting. Her team below heard the commotion. Jenkins barked orders. The Americans repositioned, returning fire uphill. It worked. Amanda had flipped the ambush. The firefight stretched on for minutes that felt like hours. She moved constantly, firing from different ridges, forcing the enemy to believe there were multiple shooters. When the dust settled, silence fell over the valley. The insurgents were gone. And for the first time in days, Amanda allowed herself to breathe. Below, her team slowly emerged from cover, scanning the horizon. She could see their confusion. They had no idea who had saved them. Doc Ellis looked up toward the ridge, eyes narrowing as if searching for a ghost. Amanda smiled faintly. Then she stepped back, disappearing behind the rocks. She wasn't ready to reveal herself, not yet. She needed to know how deep this betrayal ran. By nightfall, she had moved far enough east to find the insurgent camp again, smaller now, disorganized, rattled by the morning's ambush. She crawled to the perimeter, moving under torn netting and debris. Inside one of the tents, 2 men argued in hushed tones. Amanda recognized one of them instantly, Maddox. He spoke in clipped English, angry but controlled. "They'll think she's dead," he snapped. "The chopper went down, no shoot. I saw it myself." The other man, an older insurgent leader, frowned. "Then who killed my men today?" Maddox's expression faltered, just for a second. Amanda saw it, that flicker of fear. He didn't believe his own lie anymore. The leader leaned closer. "If she's alive, she'll come for you. You know that, yes?" Maddox swallowed. "Not if we move now. We set the decoy signal at Thunder Ridge. Her team will walk right into us at dawn." Amanda froze. Thunder Ridge, extraction zone. It was a setup. Her team wasn't heading to safety. They were walking into another death trap. She backed away silently, heart pounding. Every second counted now. By the time she reached the upper ridge again, the sky had gone black. Clouds rolled in, thick and heavy, thunder rumbling far in the distance. She ran. Each step felt like fire. Her lungs screamed. Her ribs burned, but she didn't stop. Not now, not when her team's lives balanced on ours. The storm broke just as she reached their camp. Rain hammered the rocks, wind slicing through the canyon. Jenkins and Morales were half asleep, huddled under a tarp. Ellis sat awake, cleaning his weapon, his face drawn and pale. Amanda crouched at the edge of the light unseen, soaking wet, exhausted. She could have stepped in, revealed herself, but doing so would raise questions they didn't have time to answer. Instead, she whispered their names, soft enough that only the wind carried it. Jenkins, Morales, Ellis. Ellis froze. He looked up sharply, eyes wide. For a moment, Amanda saw recognition flicker in his face. Confusion, disbelief, hope. Then lightning flashed, and in that split second of light he saw her, just her silhouette, framed against the storm. "Reynolds," he whispered. She smiled faintly, then vanished into the dark. By morning, the rain had washed away her footprints. But her message had reached them. When the team broke camp, they didn't follow the beacon signal toward Thunder Ridge. They veered west instead, the route she'd marked for them through the rock formations with small, precise stacks of stone. The kind of signal only a ranger would recognize. Hours later, they made it through the narrow pass, the same moment the insurgents detonated the decoy charge at Thunder Ridge. Amanda watched the explosion from a mile away, rain dripping from her helmet. She exhaled slowly. They were safe. For now. But as she turned back toward the valley, she knew this wasn't over. Maddox was still alive, and somewhere out there, Command would learn that the woman they thought had died was still fighting. The storm howled, lightning splitting the sky. Amanda looked up at it, her breath visible in the cold. "Ghosts don't fade," she whispered. "They finish what they start." The wind answered with silence. And somewhere deep in the mountains, the hunted woman became the hunter again. How do you hunt a man you once trusted? How do you face the person who looked you in the eye before they threw you to die? Amanda Hawk Reynolds didn't have an answer, only a direction. The morning after the storm, the valley was washed clean. Rivers carved new paths through the rocks. The air carried that strange, temporary peace that follows chaos. She moved through it like a shadow returning home. Her team was safe, at least for now. Jenkins and the others would reach the fallback site by nightfall. But Maddox, he was still out there. And Amanda couldn't leave this valley until she knew why. She tracked him by instinct. Every sign told a story, the angle of a boot print, the spacing of footprints in sand, the drag mark of a rifle butt. He was heading north, toward the ruins that locals called the Widow's Spine. A maze of stone and metal, half-eaten by the earth, remnants of an old Soviet outpost. A place no one went willingly. Amanda adjusted her sling and began the climb. The air thinned quickly, cold biting at her lungs. Each step up the ridge reopened the bruises beneath her ribs, but she didn't stop. Pain was no longer a signal to slow down. It was proof she was still moving. Halfway up, she found a patch of disturbed dirt, signs of a hastily buried crate. She knelt, brushing the mud away with steady hands. Inside, ammunition, rations, a radio, military issue, U.S. markings. He'd been here recently, and he was preparing for something. Amanda exhaled slowly. Whatever this was, it wasn't just betrayal. It was operation-level treason. Maddox wasn't working with the enemy. He was controlling them. She followed the trail higher until she reached the ruins. The Widow's Spine loomed like a carcass of concrete and twisted rebar. Rusted watchtowers leaned at broken angles, their windows shattered and black. The wind whistled through them, carrying the faint hum of something electric. Amanda crouched, scanning. Voices faint below ground. She moved toward a cracked bunker door half covered in sand. The metal was corroded, but she slipped through the gap silently, pistol drawn. Inside, the air was cold and stale. Old Soviet wiring snaked across the walls, feeding flickering light bulbs powered by a modern generator. Tables lined with maps, comms gear, satellite images. And in the center of it, Maddox. He was hunched over a radio, speaking quietly. Confirm package en route. Repeat, extraction will proceed under red echo clearance. Amanda froze in the shadows. Red echo, she knew that code. It wasn't a combat extraction, it was a covert trade. Maddox wasn't just leaking positions, he was trading intel for cash. Selling the mission, selling lives. She stepped forward, her voice low and steady. Who are you trading this time, Cole? Maddox stiffened. Slowly he turned. His face was gaunt, eyes hollow from sleepless nights. For a heartbeat, disbelief flickered across his features like he was seeing a ghost. Amanda. Her gaze didn't waver. You left me to die. He took a slow step back, hands raised slightly. You weren't supposed to, it wasn't. Finish the sentence. He swallowed hard. It wasn't personal. Amanda's voice cracked like thunder. You cut my harness. His silence was confirmation. For a long moment, the bunker held nothing but the hum of electricity. Then he sighed, the sound strangely tired. You don't understand, Reynolds. They would have shut us down. Command wanted the op buried. I had no choice. She took another step forward. You had my choice in your hands, and you made it for me. Maddox's expression hardened. You think you're the only one who's had to bleed for this. You think this machine gives a damn about you. I tried to survive it. Amanda's breath trembled. We all did. Difference is, the rest of us didn't sell each other to do it. His jaw clenched. You don't get it. You were the symbol they wanted to destroy, the woman ranger, the story they couldn't control. They sent me to make sure you failed. The words hit her harder than any bullet. She stared at him, numb, her mind reeling. They ordered it. He hesitated. That hesitation was answer enough. Amanda's voice dropped to a whisper. You followed orders to murder one of your own. Maddox looked away. You were never supposed to die. The fall was meant to pull you from the mission, quietly, cleanly. Amanda's hand trembled slightly on her weapon. But I did fall. And you survived, he said, almost in awe. You weren't supposed to. Lightning flashed through the cracked roof above, illuminating both of them in pale blue light. Amanda saw him clearly then. Not a villain, not a soldier, but something worse. A man who'd forgotten the difference. For a moment, the rage in her chest flared white-hot. One squeeze of the trigger, and it would end. But she didn't lift the gun. She lowered it. That confused him. You're not going to shoot me. Amanda shook her head slowly. No, you don't get that mercy. You're going to live long enough to face what you did. Maddox laughed, short, broken. You think you'll get out of this valley alive? She stepped closer. I already did. Then movement. The sound of boots. Amanda spun. The insurgents were flooding in from the tunnel, half a dozen, weapons drawn. Maddox shouted something in Pashto. The leader hesitated, confused. That's when Amanda moved. 2 shots, 2 down. She dropped behind a concrete barrier, reloading fast. Gunfire erupted, bullets sparking off steel. Maddox dove behind the table, screaming, "Don't shoot, she's worth more alive." Amanda fired again, clipping the light overhead. The bunker plunged into chaos, flashing muzzle fire, shouting, the smell of cordite thick in the air. She moved low, precise, shifting positions with every shot, years of training collapsing into instinct. When the smoke cleared, 3 bodies lay still, 2 more ran. Maddox was gone. Amanda's chest heaved. The adrenaline masked her pain, but only barely. She stumbled toward the radio, grabbing the mic. Command, this is Ranger 1, do you copy? Static, then faint, crackling words. Ranger 1, impossible. She almost smiled. Not impossible, sir, just inconvenient. The line went dead again. Battery drained. She slammed the radio down and looked toward the tunnel Maddox had escaped through. Footprints, fresh. She followed them. Outside, the storm had returned, sheets of rain slicing through the sky. Lightning tore across the horizon. revealing Maddox scrambling up the cliffside, clutching a stolen rifle. Amanda's boots hit the mud hard as she chased. Every breath was agony, every step a battle. But her focus was pure. At the ridge, Maddox turned and fired. The round grazed her shoulder. She didn't flinch. She fired back. The bullet tore through his rifle, knocking it from his hands. He fell to his knees, gasping. Amanda approached slowly, the storm roaring around them, the wind howling like something alive. He looked up at her, soaked, broken, desperate. "Why?" he rasped. "After everything, why are you still fighting?" Amanda stared at him, rain streaming down her face. "Because I still have a name," she said quietly, "and you don't." She turned away. Behind her, thunder cracked, loud enough to cover the sound of him shouting her name, the sound of boots slipping on wet rock, the dull, distant thud of his body falling into the darkness below. Amanda didn't look back. The valley swallowed the sound whole. For a long time she just stood there, staring at the horizon, breathing in the metallic scent of rain and gunpowder. The mission was over, but the war inside her was. She survived the fall. She survived betrayal. But now came the hardest part, surviving what she'd become. When the dawn finally broke again, Amanda walked out of the widow's spine alone. Her uniform was torn, her weapon empty, her dog tags glinting faintly in the new light. She didn't look like a soldier. She looked like a story no one would believe. But that didn't matter, because she'd learned something the moment she fell from the sky. Courage is what keeps you alive. It's what you give away so others can be. And sometimes dignity doesn't shout. It simply walks away into the storm and lets the silence speak for it. What happens after survival? After the blood dries, the echoes fade, and the valley finally goes still. Amanda Hawk Reynolds walked without hurry now. Each step sounded like a heartbeat returning to rhythm. The sun was climbing, pale and cold. Steam rose from the ground, where the night rain still lingered. Far below, the Valley of Bones lay silent, the wrecked helicopter a gray scar against the stone. Wind hissed through its broken frame, whispering names that no one would answer. Amanda paused at the ridge and looked back one last time. Somewhere down there lay the man who had betrayed her and the ghosts of those who hadn't. She didn't feel triumph, only gravity. Every mission leaves a cost. This one had taken everything that wasn't nailed down inside her. She adjusted the torn strap on her shoulder, tightened it across the wound. Then she started the long climb out. By mid-morning, she found the trail her team had used, faint boot prints half filled with rainwater. She followed them uphill through brittle grass and frost, moving toward a plateau where the air smelled faintly of smoke. At first she thought it was another fire. Then she heard it, the unmistakable chop of rotors somewhere far off, muffled by the mountains. Extraction. Amanda stopped, her throat closed. She wasn't supposed to be part of that extraction. On paper, she was still dead. And yet, every instinct in her screamed to move toward it. She descended carefully, eyes scanning for movement. When she reached the final ridge, she saw them, Jenkins, Morales, and Doc Ellis, huddled beside a signaling flare, their faces raw with exhaustion. A Black Hawk circled above, kicking up clouds of dust and snow. Amanda's breath caught. They were alive. They made it. She could have walked out of the shadows then, waved, shouted anything. But she stayed where she was, hidden among the rocks, watching. Maybe part of her didn't believe she belonged there anymore. Jenkins was limping, his arm in a sling. Morales sat beside him, eyes half closed, whispering a prayer. Ellis knelt in the dirt, staring up at the sky like she was searching for something. When the chopper descended, the sound filled the valley, a low thunder that rattled her bones. Amanda's pulse quickened. And then through the swirl of dust, Ellis turned her head as if sensing it and looked straight toward Amanda's position. For a long moment, neither moved. Amanda could see the recognition dawn in Ellis's eyes, disbelief followed by tears. Ellis mouthed something through the noise. "You're real." Amanda smiled faintly and lifted a hand, not waving, not saluting. Just acknowledging. Then she stepped back out of view, letting the mountain swallow her silhouette. Ellis shouted something to Jenkins, pointing, but by the time he turned, Amanda was gone. The helicopter rose, banking east. The wind from its blades washed over the ridge, carrying dust, rain, and the faintest trace of freedom. Amanda closed her eyes and let it pass through her. She didn't need extraction. Not yet. There was something purer about walking out of the valley. You were never meant to survive. She moved west for 3 days, following the river until it widened into plains dotted with scrub and broken fences. Every mile peeled away another layer of the person she'd been: ranger, soldier, call sign, myth. Underneath it all was just a woman who had refused to stay dead. At night, she built small fires hidden under rock. She wrote names in the dirt and let the wind erase them: Jenkins, Morales, Ellis, the ones who didn't make it. Each name felt lighter when it disappeared. On the 4th morning, she found a convoy, UN trucks crawling along a dirt road. She stepped into their path, rifle slung low, hands open. The soldiers froze, confused by the sight of a woman in torn ranger fatigues, eyes sunburnt, hair matted, dog tags clinking softly against her chest. One of them raised a radio, whispering in disbelief. Within minutes, another helicopter appeared, this one white, marked with blue. As they lifted her from the ground, Amanda looked down at the valley shrinking below. The storm clouds had cleared completely now. The mountains no longer looked cruel. They looked quiet. The debrief came days later, in a sterile tent at Bagram. She sat across from a colonel who couldn't stop glancing at her file. Half of it was redacted, half stamped KIA. He looked up finally. "We don't know how you made it out, Reynolds." She met his gaze evenly. "Neither do I, sir. Maybe the valley didn't want me." He exhaled, rubbing his temple. Maddox's body was recovered. The intel checks out. He was trading positions for payouts. You stopped something bigger than you realize. Amanda nodded faintly. "Then we're even." He frowned. "Even with who?" She didn't answer. Some truths didn't belong in reports. Weeks passed. Her body healed faster than her silence. Reporters wanted stories. The brass wanted statements. They called her the ghost of Thunder Ridge, the ranger who fell from the sky. A symbol, a miracle. Amanda hated the word. Miracles didn't bury friends. Miracles didn't come home with nightmares that smelled like cordite and rain. She attended the small, memorial service held for her unit. Jenkins was there, arm still in a sling. Morales stood beside him, quiet, eyes distant. Ellis approached her afterward, holding a folded flag. "They said you died," Ellis whispered. Amanda managed a thin smile. "I did for a while." Ellis looked at her for a long time, then said softly, "You saved us." Amanda shook her head. "No, we saved each other." They stood in silence, the flag between them, the sound of the wind cutting through the base like memory. That night, alone in the barracks, Amanda opened the locker that bore her name. Inside, her old ranger tab, scratched and faded. She held it in her palm for a long moment. It felt heavier now, as if every mile of that valley had settled into the metal. She pinned it back to her uniform, not because she needed to wear it, but because she needed to remember what it had cost to earn. In the mirror, her reflection looked older, quieter. But there was something steady in her eyes, not anger, not sorrow. Clarity. She whispered to herself, "Survival isn't luck, it's debt, you pay it forward." Months later, she left the service quietly. No ceremony, no interviews. Just a transfer of papers, a handshake, and the sound of boots echoing down a hallway one last time. She disappeared again, not into battle but into life. Some said she went back home to the mountains. Others claimed she trained new recruits under a different name. A few believed she was still out there, somewhere, answering to no one but the wind. But those who had served with her knew the truth. Amanda Hawk Reynolds didn't vanish. She became the silence between wars, the unseen presence in every rescue, every steady aim, every act of quiet courage. A reminder that not every hero stands in the light. Some walk through valleys so others don't have to. Years later, a young ranger candidate asked an instructor if the story of the woman who fell from the helicopter was true. The instructor smiled faintly. Depends on what you mean by true. The cadet frowned. Did she really survive the fall? The instructor paused, looking toward the horizon where dawn was breaking. She didn't just survive, he said softly. She kept going, and that's what makes her real. Amanda sat on a porch somewhere high above the clouds, the wind brushing against her face. No uniform now, no medals, just the rhythm of her breathing, the smell of pine, and the steady hum of peace. A newspaper rested beside her, folded open to a headline about another conflict far away. She stared at it for a while, then closed it gently. The world never stops fighting. But maybe that's why people like her exist, not to win every war, but to remind others how to keep their soul in one. She looked toward the horizon, sunlight breaking through thin fog. Her reflection shone faintly in the window glass, older, scarred, human. And for the first time in years, she whispered the words she'd carried since the fall. They threw me from the sky, but gravity never owned me. She smiled then, small, quiet, unshakable. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply stands back up. It keeps walking. It endures. And somewhere between the storm and the silence, it becomes legend.